Next item on our agenda, presentation, broadband update. Kevin Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the boards, first, yes, I want to thank you for letting me follow that presentation. I have PowerPoint slides. All right. I'm Kevin Nelson. I am the Director of Information Technology, and today I'm going to update you on some broadband activities that we've been working on, and also in the second part, talk about the grant programs. There's a state and a federal grant program for broadband. So in 2012, the board appointed, at that time it was called a high-speed internet committee, to look at the challenges that the county faced in the rural areas for getting broadband speed internet access. And they came up with some recommendations, and they sort of are going to form the template of my update on our activities. So they suggested you designate a point person, and Frank Harkson has been designated as the policy side, and I'm the technical person. A second recommendation was related to special tax districts, and I have no action. The board didn't seem at that time to be very supportive of that concept. The third one, so I took some liberties on the third one. The recommendation from the committee was actually to piggyback on when parents enroll their children in school, that they should have some form that talks about their internet accessibility at their home. I'm not sure schools were real thrilled about that, but what I've interpreted that to be was really we wanted to map the internet availability. We wanted to know who has what throughout the county. And that was an idea of doing that, but the federal and state governments have undertaken some mapping initiatives, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in detail in a second. Another recommendation was to make sure you expanded internet access in the libraries, and all libraries in Hanover County do have broadband internet. Another recommendation related to communication. There is information posted on the county website about the high-speed internet committee, as well as some frequently asked questions and some other information about broadband. The staff are participating in Congressman Whitman's broadband task force, and I know some board members are active in that task force as well. That's been I'm going to talk a little bit about some of their things that they've done. We've had many technical discussions with our peers on this topic, and what I can tell you is anybody who has a rural area, any locality that has a rural area, is going through this exact same thing we are. They're asking the exact same questions, and they're trying to figure it out. What is the best option to do things? And so we have been talking to them about what they're doing and some of the things that we're doing. The county also sent out letters to some of the providers, AT&T and Verizon and Sprint, to co-locate on county towers. So one of the things is not just wireless, but 4G, to make sure we're expanding that access. I know 4G, you can get to the internet through your computer using your phone. It's not great speed, but it is an option that we think is at least got some validity. So the board has also entered into two agreements with two different companies over the past few years, wireless internet service providers. Last Mile was the first one, and they actually did install equipment on the Poor Farm Park Tower, and then they struggled to get anybody to sign up for their service, and ultimately the company in general struggled and has gone on its way. And the second one was about 2 years ago, I think, with SCS Broadband. And they, if you remember, signed leases for towers in the western part of the county and the eastern part of the county. And we have talked to them, and they understand that they have not met all their obligations that they have promised the county. They are struggling to meet those, but they have not disappeared. They are still around. I'll give you my little sidebar. I never understood how much rain affected wireless internet service providers. But these SCS guys can tell you exactly how many days it's rained in the last 24 months, and it's affecting them being able to get on the towers and put their equipment in and calibrate it and configure it properly. So they're still there. They are still struggling to provide some of the things that they promised to the county. And the last recommendation relates to grant opportunities, and I am going to talk a little bit more about this. The state does now have a grant program called the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. Its acronym is VATI, V-A-T-I, so you may see that in some slides. And the federal government has a grant program for broadband called Federal Reconnect. And this is the one Congressman Whitman has been a big proponent for and helped to get through. So staff has attended a lot of grant work sessions to learn about these grants and how they work. We've also reached out to a lot of private internet service providers. So we've contacted Comcast and Verizon and CenturyLink, SCS, and Segra, who are all service providers in this area, to gauge their interest on partnering with the county in some type of grant opportunity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about an update on that in a second. I did want to bring up two topics that weren't part of the High-Speed Internet Committee report, but are part of the broadband discussion. One is the General Assembly passed legislation. They call it the middle mile legislation. And so one of the things they recognized was, and Hanover's a good example, we have a suburban area where we have Comcast that provides the service, but we may have areas just outside of that where there are very few homes. And then you get to an area where there's a congregation of homes, a subdivision or just a lot of homes. Well, internet service providers are reluctant to try and fill that void. They got to pay for all this infrastructure where there's not a lot of homes to get to a place where there are homes. So this program allows Dominion to actually put fiber optic cable on their lines in that middle mile area. So they can connect from the suburban area to an area where an internet service provider might want to put their infrastructure. It's a very new program. We've reached out to them to try and find some information. I don't know of anybody who's taken advantage of it just yet, so, but it is out there. And secondly, the town of Ashland. The town of Ashland's actually done a fiber master plan effort and has invested some money in a sort of a phase one, I guess, building of fiber in the town. Their phase one is really to try and get to the downtown commercial area to provide better fiber opportunities or internet access through fiber opportunities. So I did want to talk about the grant programs. There's a state program and a federal program. First of all, overall, these grants, you must be an internet service provider or have an internet service provider partner to apply for the grants. And I'm going to go into both of these grant programs a little bit, but the county, Hanover County, cannot in and of itself apply for a grant because we are not an internet service provider. Maybe in Northern Virginia they have a locality that does that, but otherwise no locality does this in the state of Virginia, provides it. So we have to have a partner. We have to have an internet service provider partner. All of these grants are to get broadband service or better internet service in areas that are classified unserved. And I won't go into, there is a definition of upload and download, but it's areas where the definition is that it's unserved. So you can see in the lower right, and I actually have that in a whole slide in a little bit, the dark brown areas are the areas, this is the one the state did, that are unserved. And I'm sure you're looking at that map saying, I know I have constituents in the non-brown areas who say they don't have broadband internet. Absolutely could be. This is a generalized map. They're using software across the state or nationally to generate these maps. The federal, Congressman Whitman had somebody come from the federal government who said they have a whole program now trying to refine these maps because they recognize that they do have inaccuracies within them. But as it stands today, this is what we deal with. So when you're applying for a grant, you look at the dark brown areas for the areas that qualify. Now, you can do your own independent analysis. I do not know of any locality that has done that, gone out, hired a contractor to determine that maybe there are some other areas that meet that definition of unserved. One point for that map, the map does not show satellite-based or cellular services. So there are internet services, HughesNet, that use satellites, and the cellular services is the 4G service. Generally, your mileage varies. You could get broadband level speeds or not, depending on where you are with those services. But they are not part of that mapping exercise. Again, all the grants are competitive. You'll see that not all grants get approved. One of the things I wanted to point out was it's never as easy as you think, right? So if you are putting infrastructure in a VDOT right-of-way, you have to have a permit. If you're crossing a water body, you have to have a permit. So it's not just we can go out and do this. There's some permits involved. You have considered utility lines and roads and stormwater for easements over private property. If we cross private property, we have to have an easement for this infrastructure. So I wanted to talk about this is a federal reconnect, and it is a loan grant program. So there are 3 tiers to this program. The 100% grant, there's $200 million allocated. There's a 50% grant, 50% loan, which has $200 million. And there's a 100% loan, which is $200 million. On the 100% grant, they got $600 million in requests for $200 million. On the 50-50 grant loan, they got $550 million or so for $200 million. So a lot of people are submitting for these grants. I don't know about the low interest loan. That deadline was just recently. There is a 25% match requirement. So you have to put up some, it's just not all grant 100%. Even 100% grant requires a 25% match. That's weird. The 2019 deadlines for this program have passed, but 2020 it is projected that the federal government will put up another $550 million for this. So the federal grant program, corporations can apply for these for broadband infrastructure on their own. They do not need the county to do this. They can do it on their own. They have to be an internet service provider, so the Comcasts and the Cox and those of the world can do it, but they can do it unilaterally, so they don't need the county. They can do it with the county, but they don't have to have that. So unfortunately, we have talked to a number of people who have looked at this grant process, mostly on the private side, and it is extremely difficult. It has a lot of requirements associated with it, as many federal grants do. The guidance document is 230 pages, so it is just onerous. We know of people who are doing applications who are hiring third-party consultants to do the application. So it's very, and Congressman Whitman has acknowledged that and said we need to do better. We being the federal government needs to do better. So there are extensive reporting requirements. It requires a certified engineer design. So we have to go out and actually engineer something before we can even apply for the grant to get money to do it. So a lot of requirements there. So again, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative grant process is the state grant program. So a unit of government must apply in partnership with an internet service provider. And I put that in there because city, town, county, broadband authority, planning district commission have to be the applicant. A corporation cannot just do it on their own. You have to have the local, some government, local government entity. And again, we have to have a private sector internet service provider, so they have to be together. The application has to go together. It can go for fiber or wireless, and fiber is just the actual physical cable that is either in the ground or done through aerially. It's much more reliable form of internet. Wireless is where they're putting some equipment on a tower, and they're pushing a signal to you that you consume. So just two different flavors. Either one qualifies under this program. You have 1 year to construct. You can get extensions. They're a little vague on what that means, but they do allow those. It requires a 20% match. Now, I will say that the applications that have been approved for this grant program, the internet service provider, so the private company, has paid the 20%. The cost of the entire program of each grant has been such that the internet service provider paid that 20%. I don't know of any locality that actually had to pay the 20%, but it is required. We have noticed a trend. The more you put up against the grant, the more likely you are to get the grant. Interesting. Projects that ask for, maybe a couple $100,000, but the whole project's $800,000 have seemed to get more preference. Might be an anomaly, but I don't know. It is focused on residential service areas, but it does include commercial. You get points. It's a point system for the criteria. But its focus is residential. So I wanted to mention this target cost for the grant, this per service unit. And I apologize for getting too much in the weeds, but this is what does it cost? So the state's looking for the best return on investment. So it's what does it cost per home to do this project, whatever project you're proposing. Well, the target is $300 per home. And you go over that, it's just, this is the main criteria. So the more you go over that, the less likely you are to get the grant. Well, you can all have rural roads. So drive down the road and you see all the houses along the road. Those will be easy to put in a grant application. Then you get the long driveways. All the people on that rural road who have long driveways, it can be thousands of dollars to go down those driveways or those private roads. That changes your $300 per service unit. So even the state acknowledged that there are times when potentially the locality or the internet service provider should pay for that outside of the grant. So it comes, for me, it's expectations. If we say we're going to take fiber down this road, everybody's going to think, well, I got access to the fiber. That may not be true. Depending on how long your driveway is, you may be in or out of the grant process. So it's a little complicated sometimes. I'm not going to go through all these other requirements, but just to show you, you need a plan, a timeline, a marketing plan, itemized costs. The network design on this one is not nearly what the federal one is. It's more of a people are doing more GIS maps that show the lines, and that seems to be suffice. You do if you're a wireless, so you have approved conditional use permits for towers. And in those packets, they'll have this thing that shows the tower in this very pixelated service area, basically. It's called a propagation map. It's what area that tower can serve. And then you put homes on top of that, you know what homes can be served. If you're doing a wireless, you have to do that kind of a map. So we need the internet service provider to do that kind of thing. So again, here's the map. This is the one from the state that shows what by definition is unserved in Hanover County. And it's a little hard. You see Ashland in the middle, so you can sort of go to Rockville is one area. Montpelier generally is an area. Doswell, an area. You got an area along the Pamunkey, along River Road there. Down to Old Church Road falls into that, and then Black Creek subdivision. And you, I know, have had past experience with Black Creek trying to get something done down there. As it stands right now, those are the areas that qualify for a grant. Those are the areas that have been deemed unserved. So I understand you'll say, hey, I got people in this area. It's just they haven't fallen into that based on what the mapping we've been provided. So just a real quick on the history, you can see that these grant programs have only been around for a few years. In 2017, the state put up $1 million. In 2018, they put up $1 million. So you can see the applications, though. So 17, only 4 were funded. 12, 5 were funded. In 2019, $4 million. 31 applications, 11 funded. So between 2017 and 2019, I wanted to put this down. 10 of those applications, the local government partnered with a wireless provider. In 6 of those applications, they partnered with somebody who was doing fiber. 3 of them were electric co-ops who provide internet service, or an internet service provider. And God bless Floyd County. I read the application. I'm almost positive it's a homeowners association that's providing the internet service. I don't know how they're doing it, but God bless them, they figured it out. In 2020, 19 million. So you can see the jump now, 1 million, 1 million, 4 million, now there's $19 million. And the rumor is it may go up next year, that the General Assembly would put more funding into this. So we're looking at continuing our work efforts. We want to continue to communicate, utilize our website for making sure we update people and educate people on, what exactly is the status of broadband for Hanover. Continue to coordinate with our peers. They are doing different things, and we can learn from them, successes and failures. We want to continue to encourage people to co-locate on our towers. The board has established that as a policy, that we are happy to have partners co-locate on these towers. We have had some that came forward. We're happy to entertain more. And also continue to assess grant opportunities. So we do need the private internet service provider as a partner, looking for opportunities that make sense in area of need. So we've talked with Comcast. Comcast is putting together something that they believe will be of interest to us. Have not seen it. We are talking to Segra. Segra is the group that did the town of Ashland. We're talking to them in a couple of weeks. They're interested in potentially doing something. SCS is interested, but they understand they've got some existing commitments that maybe they need to meet before we can move forward with it. And I've also contacted CenturyLink. I haven't got anything from them, but there is interest out there from these private internet service providers. But at this point, the county doesn't have anything concrete that's been presented to us. I'm happy to answer any questions.
From the board. Ms. Kelly, I believe, was first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Mr. Nelson, for covering all of this, and I'm really glad that you covered where we stand with some of those specific internet service providers, because I think that is important. I think we need to reassure our citizens that, in fact, we are having conversations. We are pushing for better partnerships. We are pushing for every possible solution to the issue. And I would like you, if you would, to please address where we might stand with Verizon, because I think you know that we have still had great difficulty communicating with our citizenry and getting it out on a broader basis. We continue to communicate it, but we seem to struggle to get this message to everybody who needs to hear it. Where we stand with Verizon and anything we may or may not have done to impact their decision to come to Hanover with a service.
Right, so Hanover has absolutely not discouraged Verizon from coming into the county. We're happy to have them, whether it's from a cable aspect or from an internet aspect. I don't know their business model to understand why they have chosen to not necessarily bring fiber into Hanover. They do have wireless in Hanover. But absolutely, we would love them to come. It helps us to have another partner here. To go back to the town, that was one of the things. Town has Comcast. They went and got another partner in Segra that helps them in that conversation. So as far as I know, we actually reached out, I think, with a letter to Verizon.
We did, because of the confusion regarding the communication. We actually had an official at Verizon share with us a letter. I think at one time it may have been even put on the website. I'm not sure whether it's still there or not, but they made a business decision to not run FiOS into Hanover County. They still continue to market their FiOS program, and there is some confusion around that because their marketing people are doing what marketing people do, and they're saying, yes, we want to come serve you, but there has been other decisions along with that there are areas of that service that make sense for them, and as we speak today, Hanover is not in that service area for the FiOS and for the expanded coverage.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nelson, I very much appreciate this. You know, one of the things that's difficult is when you speak with constituents, and sometimes, and I know all of our fellow board members have done this, when you sometimes present the obstacles and the facts, and then there doesn't appear to be a solution, then the frustration level rises. The frustration level rises with us. I actually had a constituent call me with a Verizon technician one time, put me on the phone with him, and Verizon technician told me, it's the Board of Supervisors who just won't let us in. And he told me, he said, I don't know if you know anybody on the board that you could speak to. I said, yeah, I do. But one of the issues is, and it comes down to a math problem. It's a math problem. It'll take about 75 to $80 billion, they estimate at current rates to outfit the entire country with internet. Out of that, the federal government, Secretary Perdue, I think, has come up with about $632 million. So we're about 90% off. But that said, that money is being used, that grant, those taxpayer monies are transferred from the private sector through a taxing initiative, vehicle, to then redistribute the money to those who aren't able to afford to pay for that internet. And that money will go to the Comcast and the Verizons and those types of things. So I want folks to understand, you mentioned a special taxing district a number of years ago. I had a internet town hall meeting at Battlefield Elementary, and there were some folks in the non-supplied area who were unable to, living in the rural areas, who said, hey, I'd like to have a special taxing district. There were many folks from King's Charter and Milestone who said, I don't want a special taxing district, right? But the cost is still there. So that, let's say it's $5,000 to run down one driveway and $1,000 to run down another. Somebody's still going to pay that $6,000. If the residents can't pay that, we use the grant money, which would be your fellow citizens would fund that for you to come down your driveway, to transfer that and then redistribute it to there. Still has to be paid, and that's one of the tough things because of the criteria that was put on. And I spoke with Congressman Whitman, and I appreciate his efforts. The current criteria, first of all, it has to be an established internet service provider. I want the citizens to know that. It cannot be a startup who's trying to incubate and say, I'd like to get into this business and take a whack at it, if you will. And Comcast was set in the meeting, I believe it was, and Mr. Schumacher's here from Congressman Whitman's office, I believe it was Comcast who was down in Tappahannock and said, we'll be happy to take the grant money. We'll take it either from the customer or from the federal government. We'll take it from whoever. Somebody's got to pay us to deliver this product. But we didn't qualify, and Congressman Whitman's working really hard on that, working on trying to get block grant funding for the state, which is not available right now. And those are the tough things. But the math problem that we still have is a math problem, I think, that Mr. Harris spoke about, which is why Verizon doesn't want to come here, because it's just not cost effective. But through the grant programs, if you can use tax dollars that were collected from other folks and then give it over to the private sector to try to balance that, that is the model. That is what the grant does. It's a tax dollar, a taxpayer-funded internet service provider payment to bring that there to those areas. That said, what we were told was that it's 6 people per square mile of some of the populous area. There's nowhere in Hanover County that has 6 people per square mile. We're above that. And Mr. Schumacher may be able to verify this. There were 2 applications in the entire state of Virginia that were accepted, but none were funded. There were multiple, right. So here we are, supporting these types of initiatives, and I believe they said Idaho, South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, some of those places are going to see that $632 million. So we're trying to figure out this math problem and how folks who currently, and I recognize paying $5,000 to go down your driveway is a lot of money. I don't believe they're going to be able to access that money from the 632, at least here in Virginia. And we're trying to work on some grant funding or even change the criteria, was one of my suggestions to Congressman Whitman, was to change the criteria of that density and maybe do percentage-wise or tier that out to get down into Old Church, to get down into Black Creek, out to Beaver Dam and some of those areas. but we haven't seen that happen yet. So thank you for that, and we do continue to work on this. I know Ms. Kelly Wiesek sat on the very first internet. Oh, Mr. Stanley, that's right. Mr. Stanley sat on it back in 2012. That'd be a good idea. I think if we want to start another one up, Mr. Schaeffer was here. I'm more than happy to vote to allow that to happen too. But I appreciate the information, and it is extremely concerning. But it's not a complicated fix. It's not. It's just the money's not there in the private sector. So I think now folks are coming to the government for that solution. And the last thing I'd say, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me, is that so far we haven't seen a whole lot of technology initiatives through the federal government. They're just funding initiatives. Nobody's trying to build through NASA, another Hubble telescope. It's a funding initiative. It is not necessarily a technology initiative with this right here. It's just taking those tax dollars to purchase those internet services for those who can't afford it on the private level. So hopefully there'll be some opportunity there. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Wyatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I even started this as a board member, I attended a town hall meeting on broadband that Mr. Davis was chairing at Battlefield School, and there must have been 300 folks there. So the conversation has been going on for many years, and I want to thank Congressman Whitman and his district director, Joe Schumacher, who's here today, for continuing to be so engaged in the locality. And yeah, I worked 33 years at one of the large companies where their revenue is over close to $30 billion a quarter, who chooses not to expand their service. And while I was there, all the capital funding is going wireless. So that is the wave of the future. Fiber to cell sites, and it will be a wireless network. I did share with Mr. Harris that I was going to try Viasat at my house. I haven't pulled the trigger on it, but I'm going to try one of the satellite companies. Of course, there are two in the eastern part of the county that folks use, and I was just at Congressman Whitten did an event Saturday where he spoke on broadband in New Kent County. I attended and talked to an individual there that had Viasat. Of course, he can't watch videos and do Netflix and all the things that people expect nowadays. They want to be able to watch their TV over their broadband service, and I guess the demand that folks have is so high for their broadband service. I do see it being able to maybe qualify something in the town of Ashland, because the ISP is located right there in the town of Ashland, right on top of the local exchange carrier there. So it'd be a great opportunity if the local carrier would provide it. So I just feel the county needs to continue to be very receptive to the startup, not startup companies, but companies that want to provide broadband, whether it be an SCS broadband that's in Charles City County in the industrial park now that wants to come into New Kent and then come into eastern part of Hanover County. But we've been hearing that for over 2 years, so I don't have much faith and confidence in that. I've personally reached out to them and talked to them along the way when they first came here for, I believe it was a conditional use permit. So I'd like to see Hanover County continue to work with all the providers and be very receptive and accommodating to trying to fix this issue. It isn't a short-term fix, but I do think technology in the private sector will fix this over the next few years. So I want to thank you, Mr. Nelson, for coming in, all your work on this as well. And Ms. Via, thank you for coming today. We are going to talk about, amongst my peers, about a committee. I don't know what the committee will accomplish, but I do really think we need quarterly or semi-annual updates, in my opinion, on where the county's at as far as the providers that are out there, whether the Cox cables are coming in from New Kent into Hanover, or the MetroCast are coming up 360 into Hanover, those kind of things to open it up for the competition, because that's what we know will fix this, so that large companies will step up their game, because, of course, they want density, and that was a word used when Mr. Davis did his town hall meeting many years ago. They want the high density. That's where they want to go and provide service, because it's just so costly, unless the technology takes us to that wireless service. So I want to thank you for your presentation today and your update.
Ms. Pritchard?
I have a couple of really specific questions, Kevin, Mr. Nelson. Do you know if there are plans to extend 5G service into the Richmond area and to Hanover? We are not exactly on the cutting edge of cutting edge. You may have a better sense than I of where that's
So
going.
I don't know the Richmond area. What I will tell you is what we're hearing about 5G is it will be available in very urban areas. Hanover is not. It would be, if it comes in this area, it will be the city of Richmond, maybe a little bit into the outlying Chesterfield and Henrico. But it is unlikely anytime soon that we would have 5G.
My second question is, for very good reasons, we continue to talk about the citizens who are underserved or not served. But a little bit lost in the sauce is that there are a lot of neighborhoods that are very congested where the companies like Comcast are overselling bandwidth, and it's become so congested that folks who have service sometimes don't have service. Has Comcast provided any sort of plan to speed up their service in places where the functionality is less because they're selling a great deal?
I do not know of anything that they have provided. There's no doubt that the technology, so Comcast is more fiber as opposed to wireless. And even at the town hall, Mr. Stanley, I know, was there, and Mr. Hazard was there years ago, and Patrick Henry, CenturyLink admitted that they oversold their wireless component. Fiber is a little different. They definitely look at metrics to look at cyclical use, and so they try and adjust that. It's a little harder to oversell fiber, but you can do that. But no, I don't know that Comcast has submitted anything to us related to that kind of information.
I think everybody's had questions.
I have a follow-up. Thank you. Well, I mean, as Ms. Pritchard said, this is an important issue, not just for our rural areas, but for the suburban services area as well. And I think it's not so much just the overselling of the fiber, but it is the maintenance of the infrastructure. So, I mean, I will not share them here, but I have horror stories from at the Ash Creek and Milestone area where, you know, the type of infrastructure that they have and the way that it is maintained is truly horrifying. So my question is, what kind of, and maybe this is a Mr. Harris or a Mr. Harkson question, but what kind of relationship do we currently have with the providers, and how might we improve that such that we could advocate for all of the citizens, not just the ones maybe who are having the struggle to get the service initially, but for those who, hey, they keep telling me I've got service and I've got, you know, I'm out 2 hours a day, you know, 5 days a week.
I'll take a whack at it, Kevin, and you certainly add to it. We certainly try to assist and be a conduit, but this is a transaction between private residents and a third-party business. And Hanover really isn't part of that transaction. Certainly, it is not, internet service is not a regulated part of anything we do here in Hanover County. You do not need to come to the county to get a franchise agreement or anything else. If you call us and tell us about your problems, we have contacts at the companies, and we reach out to those companies. We try to put those people in touch with the right contacts so that they can resolve their own problems. We do not keep a running list and follow up to see if your problem was actually solved to your satisfaction or not, because that's really not a transaction that we're part of. And let's be honest, we have no leverage per se in this conversation. So we try to assist with the right contacts, get people to the people who should be able to help, but that's the role that we are currently playing, and I think that's the only practical role we can, given this set of rules and regulations that we're working with.
And I know there's a lot of overlap between cable and internet, because cable companies now provide internet service, but the franchise agreement with the county is a cable franchise agreement. Right.
Thank you. If they have nothing, I have one question I want to map you showed. Majority of this county was shown as served. I know a lot of those areas were shown as served. They're served, they're not served very well. What is considered served in terms of these grant?
So if you have greater than 10 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload, and again, I think, this map in particular was done statewide. So they're considering environmental factors in how they do this assessment, but they're not getting down to the level that your constituents are, which is, I'm down on the bottom, I'm in the hollow, not in the top of the hill. They have a lot more generalization in doing this.
So the standard is not real high, is what they're, for what they're calling served.
It's not, no. That would be, you could get that with your phone and a 4G connection sometimes.
Ms. Nelson, thank you very much for this update. I wish it was more rosy than what you brought us, but we do appreciate you staying on top of it and keep going, and this board will have further discussions on where we go, what we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.